So, South Africa will now have an official 12th language. The National Assembly has passed a bill paving the way for the recognition of sign language to be constitutionally recognized. So let's probe the impact of this and essentially what happens next. Bring in National Assembly Deputy Speaker Tsenoli. Also joining us is sign language practitioner Khetha Mbatha. In fact, she is a colleague of mine as well. You might catch her on Izindaba Zethu. To both our guests, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much indeed for speaking to us. Khetha, let me begin with you. As I mentioned before the break, this has been years in the making, but it's not just about recognition. It's also about legal protection for people who use sign language.
Yes, definitely it is, and it's very important because now deaf people have the rights to actually go to departments and ask to be served in the language that they understand.
Yeah, and I suppose, Deputy Speaker, there's going to be questions around why this hasn't happened earlier. You know, in fact, there's reports emerging of efforts being made as far back as 2017. In fact, it might be even way beyond that. From a legislation's perspective, could this have been done much sooner?
I wish we could have had it sooner. It's not up to 2017. It's actually as far back as when I chaired the Reconstruction and Development Portfolio Committee in the 90s.
Sure.
That through the GPSA, founded by one of the members, Honorable Maria Ranto, that we started talking about eliminating any form of discrimination, including for people who are often discriminated against by what is not in place legislatively, such as in this instance, the recognition of sign language. Because in its absence in the legislative framework, many people, even if they agree with it theoretically, they do not see the need to practice it. So that by offering protection, we have removed a very important obstacle. It's difficult. My suspicion is that this matter has come before the Constitutional Reform Review Committee before in Parliament, but has not received support for some reason or another, which I can't fathom myself. But the most crucial part is also an important context. It's not only this one. I think we should also point out that on the same day we approved this National Assembly approval of the sign language as an official language, we also approved changes in the Legal Practice Act, which makes possible voluntary work by lawyers, and some of whom may in fact be blind, may be deaf, and so their ability to do so was important that it's protected and so on. And the most significant thing is that in the National Assembly, both these bills were approved unanimously.
Yeah.
We didn't have to vote except to register our presence in the House for unanimously approving the proposed bills. Yeah.
That's really wonderful to hear, especially because I can't imagine anybody who wouldn't welcome this move. But we know that there are several steps still. The President has to sign the bill into law. But, yeah, Deputy Speaker, at a very practical level, once he does that, what does it mean for people who use sign language in this country?
Well, for the next thing that is crucial is once the President approves this, government administratively across the three spheres of government must act not only at the three spheres and their entities, but others outside of government as well, the private sector included, needs to set in motion systems for implementing this decision. For example, we've just come back from somewhere where we were hearing how, because of the practical problems of people who use sign language, that others do not see it fit to employ them. And so there has been active, given the nature of technology and so on, recruitment of people who are deaf in jobs on the internet that do not require them to speak necessarily, but are able to do things through text and so on. So there's a lot of initiative that needs to be undertaken by all of us to ensure implementation. I think this is one of the pieces of legislation that we are going to have to extraordinarily review on a regular basis to ensure its implementation. It does require resource allocation, including at least the Department of Basic Education has already started with implementation of allowing deaf kids to be able to use sign language as part of their examinations, which is a very important initiative to at least break the path towards implementation.
There's certainly a long way still to go. You know, I can't help but think of the injustice, even perhaps of this conversation, right? People who use and depend solely on sign language wouldn't be able to take part even in this discussion. And Khetha, you know, again, awareness is one thing, and the recognition as an official language through legislation is one thing. But really, I suppose, making sure that inclusivity where it matters is sometimes a completely different discussion, given essentially the work that society still needs to do for us to get there.
Yes, definitely, because the sign language interpreter that we have in South Africa are not enough. So while we are trying to create that inclusivity for all deaf people and making sure that they have access to all the services that they need, they go to the bank as an interpreter, and they go to when you go to the departments or municipality offices, you need to get a form. The form is in English. That is not the language that is accessible to some deaf people, so they would require sign language. So in a way, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of now translating some of the documents and so that it's accessible, having subtitles in most of the shows on TV so that deaf people actually can have access to the information that is being shared out there.
Yeah. You know, already there's discussions about what else could be done now that we've taken this a very important step. And among those discussions, there's conversations about perhaps sign language being introduced at schools. So in the same way that I'd learn isiZulu or any other language I'm not able to speak currently, perhaps that's also another way of ensuring that from the moment people leave school, they're at least able to negotiate different spaces meaningfully with deaf people.
Yes.
Khetha?
Oh, yes, definitely. It would actually help if sign language is included in hearing schools as well. As it was said before, yes, in deaf schools, we already have sign language as a home language. So now we need that to be also implemented in hearing schools, because then it's easy for children to learn the language when they are still young than when you are older. I went to university when I was 27, but then, yeah, it's good. But anyway, so it would definitely help, because even now when learners leave school, some don't even know where to go, which profession to choose. I mean, this is an opportunity that people can actually go and learn sign language, South African Sign Language at universities, and be qualified interpreters and so on. Yeah. And also get into research and linguistics of the language, so that the language as well is standardized.
Sure. Deputy Speaker, now that essentially the National Assembly has done its part, there's going to be questions around which other part of government ought to get involved. In other words, who's actually responsible for rolling this out?
Well, in the first place, the implications are broad. In almost every cluster of government, whether you talk social transformation, economic transformation, and peace and stability, and so on, in all of those clusters, sectors of life, action needs to be taken that are consistent with the recognition by the Constitution. Let me give you a dramatic and problematic issue. In cases of disaster, when firefighters arrive at a building, if they don't understand sign language, how are they going to communicate to people who perhaps do not hear, if they are not able to use the sign language? This is why it's crucial that the initiative by the University of the Free State, as an example, for teaching sign language, needs to be spread across all universities, not just schools, but universities as well, so that in the employment sector, I made reference to what needs to happen there, but also in business, in activities of business and so on, there needs to be accessibility by people who use sign language, so that their inclusion is not legal, but it's also practical, as we said at the beginning of this discussion. But the practical implications go across the entire society. And the example we gave of the basic education that needs to be spread to the entirety of the schooling system is an important one. It's crucial to lay the foundation for that. Even those who are supposed to be able-bodied, who are able to hear, must learn the language to communicate easily, and so on. But this is part of the useful transformation that is taking place. I thought I should also point out that the Constitutional Court itself recently struck a section of the copyright law that prevents blind people from having access to books, so to speak. And this is an important part of allowing for access by disabled people of material which otherwise, if it is not in the language they use, it's not helpful at all. It's actually discriminatory. So it was crucial. This is part of the major state initiative in the Constitutional Court legislatively. Now the executive must take the baton, so to speak, for practical implementation of these key decisions.
And hopefully that happens meaningfully. We often speak about how great the Constitutional is and its amendments, but sadly there are also instances where that fails to translate into the material conditions of people who rely on it so desperately. But it's a step in the right direction, and thanks for helping us weigh in on what happens next. Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly there is Lechesa Tsenoli. Also joining us there is Khetha Mbatha, who's a sign language practitioner. In fact, make sure that you catch Khetha on channel 163 Mzansi Wetu on Izindaba Zethu, powered by Newzroom Afrika. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time.